By Peter Hakim, the President Emeritus of the Inter-American Dialogue, and from Chicago, Eric LeCompte, Executive Director of the Jubilee USA Network. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure.
It's great to be with you.
All right. We're going to start with you, Eric. According to Reuters, Argentina's economy minister Axel Kicillof, and according to other sources, saying they've already made the interest payments to the other creditors. So the country is not in default and has effectively defied the court ruling that it can't do so unless it makes a deal with the holdout hedge funds. So what does this all mean? Is it just disregarding the rule of law?
Well, I think we have to understand that at this point, the Argentine government has complied with the rule of law. In their attempts to make payments, they essentially have been trying to honor their commitments. I think the reality of it is right now, according to Standard & Poor's, we have seen Argentina default for the second time since 2001. And so I think now there's going to be some significant repercussions that the Argentinians will face. But I think at the end of the day, Argentina probably made a decision that it was much better to default than to comply with the judge's order that would have left them open to a lot more liabilities.
But Eric, should, and Peter, please feel free to jump in here as well, should Argentina not abide by the rule of law? The court has ruled that until it has a deal with the holdouts, it cannot effectively pay these other creditors. S&P has saying it's an effective default. The mediator is saying it's default. Argentina is playing by its own rules and is saying we've made the payment, we're clear.
Can I say something?
Think part of the problem is that there's a lack of global rules in place. And that's what's got us into this situation. The reality of it is, without an international bankruptcy process, without rules for responsible lending and borrowing in place, we're setting up ourselves to have continual defaults within the global economy. So this is a much larger problem than just Argentina.
Eric, let's have Peter have his word chime in here.
Well, let me say that everyone's to blame for this situation. I think the judge made a bad decision. Even the U.S. Treasury thinks it's a bad decision. Certainly the International Monetary Fund thinks it's a bad decision, and they know something about international finance.
Why do you say it's such a bad decision, Peter?
Well, because the judge was basing his decision on sort of a very narrow legalistic issue and forgot that he was dealing with 1% of a debt that was a huge debt, and that wasn't the best way to solve it.
But Peter, Argentina has about $30 billion in foreign reserves. Why should it not be forced to honor its obligations?
Well, first of all, Argentina can't be forced to do anything. There's something called sovereign immunity. What the judge is doing is not letting a New York bank make payment to the bondholders. It's not Argentina that's restrained. Argentina has no legal binding of the court itself. Who does have the binding is the Bank of New York. The point is not that Argentina has done everything right. On the contrary, Argentina has managed its economy in a very bad way over the past 4, 5, 6 years, and it finds itself deep in a hole. Its inflation is high. Its credibility is very low internationally. And what's sad about it, in the past 4, 5, 6 months, Argentina had actually begun making modest reforms that would have put it on a much better track. Not deep reforms, it has to do a lot better, but it was modestly changing in ways that probably prevented a serious collapse of the kind it had a dozen years ago in 2001. Right. But still, it's in recession, high inflation, and it hasn't managed its economy very well at all.
It certainly cannot be given credit for managing its economy very well. But you bring up the point, Peter, that the New York court has blocked Argentina from making the interest payments unless it also pays those hedge funds. Now, Eric, you take major contention with this particular court decision for similar reasons.
Well, certainly, and I have to say, I agree with everything that Peter is saying, and I think it's very important to highlight the fact that the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the U.S. government, the United Nations, the G20 have all been against these predatory hedge funds, these holdouts, and they've all sided with
Eric,
Argentina. And it's important to point out that it's not because it's important to point out they're not siding with Argentina because they love Argentina. We have to understand that this case has global impacts. This is going to impact virtually every economy in the world. It's going to impact legitimate investors. It's going to impact debt restructurings. And from our point of view, Jubilee USA is very concerned about how this is going to affect poor countries. We have to understand that right now what Judge Griza has done is set a precedent, a very powerful precedent that equips these small predatory actors with a tool that will allow them to disrupt small economies. Right now in the New York state system, we're going to see Grenada and the Democratic Republic of Congo have some serious difficulty because of the precedent that has been set that empowers predatory actors.
Give me 1 minute here, Peter. Eric, you say that they're predators, but these are the people that you want to create enough security for that they will now invest in your country and that they will buy your bonds. So you want their business, but when things don't work out their way, you now call them predators?
It's the legitimate investors that are being hurt. We have to remember that 92% of all of the investors in Argentina restructured. And what's really important for us all to remember is that the majority of Wall Street, the majority of the investment community is hurt. It's important to note that the U.S. government, when they filed on the side of Argentina, they continually argued that this particular precedent could impact the prominence of New York as a financial jurisdiction, even impact the value of the U.S. dollar. And this is what the Justice Department was arguing. So we have to understand that this case has global impacts, and it can impact all of us. There are very few winners and a lot of losers.
Peter, Argentina has been locked out of the bond market for about 13 years now. Will this really have such a big impact?
No, I frankly think that the number one, Argentina has been locked out. The implications are not going to be very wide. We've seen numbers of other countries default. I think, in fact, you're going to see this resolved over the coming, if it's not weeks, in the next months. Argentina realizes it's playing with fire. It went through the default for reasons that are political and also to show that it wasn't going to be pushed around. But basically, Argentina ought to be paying the holdouts the same it's paying those bondholders that took huge haircuts, that gave up 70% of the value of the bonds. That makes sense for Argentina to pay that. It doesn't make sense for them to pay 100%. But the point, the most important point is, and the International Monetary Fund has said this, and I think it's why the U.S. Treasury hasn't gotten more involved and other banks haven't gotten more involved, because it really won't have much of an impact on the international system. They're going to find a way around this. They're going to find agreement. The 93% of the bondholders who accepted the reduced value of their bonds are not going to let their money sit there at $600 million while there's a debate over the legal niceties of this. There's going to be a solution to this, and it's going to come, if not in like weeks, it will come in months. Argentina is moderating its economic policies, not sufficiently, but enough to sort of keep it in the game. And I don't see any long-term issue here. I think it's going to be resolved.
All right, we're gonna let you have that last optimistic word. Thank you so much, Peter Hakim, President Emeritus of the Inter-American Dialogue, and Eric LeCompte, Executive Director of the Jubilee USA